President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Murphy's right. It's not just what's in this resolution that concerns a number of us, including funding for the Affordable Care Act. And we remember these debates in this body where a whole lot of members of Congress that have insurance paid for by taxpayers are willing, by cuts in Medicaid and other repeals of parts of the Affordable Care Act, are willing to take insurance away from so many of our constituents that make $8 and $10 and $12 an hour aren't lucky enough to have the health insurance we have, but we have provided it through this bill. I just stood for months with I'm a Democrat, with my Republican governor, John Kasich, in fighting for that. Second, it's also what's not in this bill. As a number of people have pointed out, there's not what there ought to be for the community health centers. We know, and I know in North Carolina, as in my state, there are a number of rural hospitals. We've had 2 hospitals close, announced closure in 2 major hospitals, one in Massillon, one in Dayton. Massillon is a hospital that serves a town of slightly under 40,000 people. The closest hospital is 15, 20, 25 minutes away for emergency care in Canton. The hospital in the middle of Dayton that's announced its closure, partly because of what this body, the unevenness and the attacks on health insurance, what was in the tax reform law, what that will mean for insurance prices. We know it's made a healthcare system less stable. And we know, Mr. President, we know how this bill's been written. Down the hall, about 100 feet, is Senator McConnell's, the majority leader's office. The Affordable Care Act repeal was written in that office behind closed doors by insurance company and Wall Street lobbyists. The tax reform bill, where 80% of the tax cuts went to the richest 1% of people, that was written in Senator McConnell's office by a bunch of Wall Street and tax lawyers. And now this resolution to quote unquote keep the government open, again, was written down the hall in Senator McConnell's office. There's no input from Democrats. This body is 49 Democrats in this body. We represent, I believe, more than half the population of this country, yet we were not even included in this discussion. So this is the first time ever where where one party controls the White House, the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court, yet they have not even included that. One, they're not competent enough to run the government. They just do this limp along 1 month at a time resolution. This is the 4th resolution, the 4th temporary budget, 4th continuing resolution, just since September.
Mr. President, I ask you to read Rule 19.
For the information of senators, Rule 19, paragraph 4 states, if any senator, in speaking or otherwise in the opinion of the presiding officer, transgresses the rules of the Senate, the presiding officer shall, either on his own motion or at the request of any other senator, call him to order, and when a senator shall be called to order, he shall take his seat and may not proceed without leave of the Senate, which, if granted, shall be upon motion that he be allowed to proceed in order, which motion shall be determined without debate. Any senator directed by the presiding officer to take his seat and any senator requesting the presiding officer to require a senator to take his seat may appeal from the ruling of the chair, which appeal shall be open to debate.
Mr. President?
Senator from Ohio.
Does that mean that what I said, that Senator McConnell didn't have lobbyists in his office writing legislation, is that what the Rule 19 means and what the presiding officer is now discussing with the parliamentarian, or that my friend from North Carolina is alleging?
The chair is merely reminding all senators of the rule.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not impugning anybody's motive. I'm just stating what I read in newspapers and what seems to be fact, but I'm not impugning motives here. I would add one other thing before making a motion, Mr. President, and I appreciate the reminder from the senator from North Carolina. Secretary Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, I don't know if Secretary Mattis is a Democrat or Republican, I don't really care. He obviously is nominated and confirmed by the Senate, nominated by this president. He came to our caucus and talked to a Democratic meeting and talked to us about the importance of giving us some permanence and predictability in the budget process. And for us to continue to limp along 1 month at a time is not the way we should be governing this country. Air Force Undersecretary Donovan said what we're really concerned about is the further along you go into the fiscal year with these short-term CRs, the more likely a full-year CR becomes. That's not a good thing for any of us. It will have damaging impacts on readiness and modernization. The former Air Force Secretary, with whom I was having breakfast at the Pentagon a couple of years ago, explained all the cost, all the expenses, every time the far-right wing of the Tea Party, Republican Party in the House threatened a government shutdown. Every time we get close to it, the Air Force, the military has to spend money, taxpayer dollars, to prepare for what if, in fact, they shut the government down. We can't run our government 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time. We don't have to. My Republican colleague, my friend from Kansas, just joined again the banking committee. He said this week, people who want to make sure we don't have a shutdown, people who want to resolve differences should know there are other options besides doing another short-term CR. Mr. President, I was speaking to some people in Dayton today. Dayton is the home of the largest single-site employer in Ohio, is the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The reason I'm co-chair of the Air Force Caucus is because of Wright-Pat in Springfield and Mansfield and Toledo and Youngstown in their Air Force employees in my state. I don't want people to go to work tomorrow morning whether they're inside the fence, civilians or military, or whether they work outside the fence, outside the gate. I don't want them to go to work and find out the government's closed. That's why, Mr. President, we have another option. I'm asking the Republican leader to reopen the government right now. I ask unanimous consent, that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 36, H.R. 1301, that the amendment that would provide for a continuing resolution to fund the government through Wednesday, January 24th, 3 days, and is at the desk, be considered and agreed to. The bill is amended, be considered, read a third time and passed. The motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President, I'm glad to hear that the gentleman from Ohio, the gentleman from Connecticut, they all want to get the government funded. I also think Wright-Patterson is a great military installation. I actually come from a state that has the home of the Global Response Force, the 82nd Airborne down in Fort Bragg. When the president calls and they want to send somebody into harm's way, that's where they call first. Also home to 45% of all the Marines that serve in the Marine Corps. I worry a lot about the message we're sending men and women in uniform when we can't get our act together here. Everybody in suits, everybody in the Senate, everybody here tonight is playing games with funding our government. Right? Now you just asked for a one-day CR. That didn't happen. Now you're asking for a 3-day CR. How about this? Why don't we stay here till we get this done? Why don't we realize that, look, the daylight's not going to come until about 8 or 9 hours? We can get this done before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Instead of asking for these half measures, a 1-day CR, a 3-day CR, why don't we get in a room tonight and solve our problems? Why are we actually kicking the can down the road a little bit? 1 day, 3 days. We were trying to get 1 month done, and for that reason, Mr. President, I object.
Regular order, please. Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, would the
Senator from Hawaii.
Would the senator from North Carolina yield to a question?
I yield.
It sounds like you want to stay here all night and get this done.
I do.
Would you be willing to work on a unanimous consent request to effectuate that?
Actually, what I want to work on is funding the government that goes at least for the next 4 weeks and maybe the next year. I want to get to regular order. I actually want to provide certainty to men and women in uniform who are out there fighting or in harm's way. And we're sitting here. You asked me a question, I want to answer it. I actually want to provide funding to the military and to the men and women who are working hard to protect this nation. And that doesn't happen through procedural discussions.
The senator from Hawaii has the floor. Senator from Hawaii has the floor.
So I thought I heard the senator from North Carolina suggest that we stay in and get this done tonight. I think we still have a chance to get this done before 1 a.m.
I do.
And I still have the floor. And if we don't get this done by 1 a.m., I personally don't think we should adjourn. I think this should be personally uncomfortable. I think this should be physically uncomfortable. I think we should be embarrassed by this. And I think you make a very good point. We should stay in until we get it done. And so it is disappointing to me that I hear all of that, and yet when I ask you whether you'd be willing to work on a unanimous consent request to effectuate what you just said, the answer was no.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, and I agree with the senator from Hawaii, senior senator from Hawaii. Give us just a day. Go back to the Murphy continuing resolution. You don't need to do my 3 days. Give us 1 day so we can reopen the government. So if we don't finish by 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the government's closed right now. We know that. And I'd like to ask Senator Tillis and the presiding officer and Republican leadership if they just give us that day or two and negotiate in earnest and fix this. All of us are willing to stay all night. We stayed here the weekend. We'll work as long as we need to work, because I don't want those employees tomorrow. I don't want the public to see closed signs on all these government offices. I don't want to see federal employees show up to work and be turned away. I don't want to see workers inside and outside the gate at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base find out their lives have changed, when we can fix that by a simple unanimous consent to open the government up now and give us a couple of days to do this.
Mr. President, all I would
from
say,
North
just to
Carolina.
cool down the temperature, is to say, why don't we actually get back to what we tried to accomplish just a couple of days ago? A 4-week CR that funded our military, that funded our veterans, that funded CHIP for 6 years. And then we get on to all the other things that we want to do. I, for one, have a lot of passion around coming up with the solution for the DACA population. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen the day after tomorrow, but I believe it's going to happen. What I prefer to do is actually get on to funding the government and then get on to all these other matters that are critically important to all of us.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Well, I think this is the problem. I think we have just witnessed here what the problem is. This should not be a situation where Americans are being hurt. And right now, Americans are being hurt. And we've heard it from the senator from North Carolina. We've heard it from my colleagues from Connecticut, from Ohio, and from Hawaii. We all agree, Americans right now are getting hurt. And so we don't have to do that. But we've just heard one senator, and I imagine other Republicans agree, reject a simple idea. Let's not hurt folks. Let's stay here for 3 days and just extend a unanimous consent so we can stay in our seats and get this work done, work something out. Easy way to go forward, nobody gets hurt. That was objected to. We said 1 day, 24-hour period. Hey, let's do 1 day. That was rejected. Senator from North Carolina made a suggestion that made me stand up straight. I love that suggestion. He suggested that we stay through the night. Instead of having people stressed and worried, instead of people having missing works, missing paychecks, let's stay here all night. Let's make everybody feel uncomfortable. I would work on that unanimous consent as well. But it seems like the senator from North Carolina has refused his own idea. And this is what I don't understand, because I agree with the senator of North Carolina, who keeps pounding about the military, when the military itself, the Secretary of DOD, through the spokesperson, has said a 4-week CR, and if I remember the quote exactly, would be wasteful and disastrous. So if military leaders are saying what we are doing is wrong, let us not kick the ball down the road 4 weeks, and instead stop hurting people and get the work of the Senate done. I am willing to stay here all night. It sounded like the senator from North Carolina is willing to stay here all night. And so we stand together today to say, let's minimize the damage of this. Let's do what we can not to hurt people. And that brings up the unanimous consent that I'd like to ask for. If 3 days is rejected, if 1 day is rejected, if just staying here through tonight and working on this as a Senate, facing discomfort, facing exhaustion to get this done is rejected as well, then let's at least take some of the most vulnerable people in the United States of America off the table. And that's why I have an amendment to permanently extend the Children's Health Insurance Program, providing funding for community health centers. And the reason why I say this is because somehow our children, our most vulnerable children in our country, have been pushed into a political debate which it is a political debate because nobody denies that they're in favor of providing health care for our children. This program expired 112 days ago. And for those of you who think that this is going to cost us money to provide health insurance for children, it doesn't cost any money. The CBO actually said it saves the government money. Why? Because something every one of the 100 of us know, that when you protect children, neonatal children, babies, when you give them adequate health care, you actually save long-term health care costs. So here's something that would provide millions and millions of dollars of savings, take vulnerable children and states who are worried about providing for those children, that anxiety out of this political debate. If we can't do something for our most vulnerable children, I don't know what that says about our body. This is a moral moment. 112 days this bill has expired, and somehow, suddenly that's been put into a 4-week CR at the time of a political debate. It seems to me that we're trying to use our children as a political pawn. There are so many kids that are being affected by this. 9 million nationwide, 159,000 kids in New Jersey, about 47,000 in Hawaii. Senator from Ohio, about 197,000 in Hawaii. I believe this is something just common sense. If it should be a matter of just conscience. And so I'd like to make sure that the children in this political fight are not hurt. I'd like to make sure that our community health centers in both rural spaces, urban spaces, all over our country, our community health centers serve 25 million people nationwide, 300,000 veterans. If we're concerned about our military, we should also be concerned about our veterans and 7.5 million children in our community health centers. Let me say again, Americans' community health centers serve 7.5 million children. Let's fund them both, move them off the table, not inject them into a political debate to be used as pawns for leverage to do something the United States military, Department of Defense, has criticized what we're doing right now, what the proposal is, 4 weeks. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent. The Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 36 HR 1301, the Stabenow, Casey, Brown amendment at the desk providing for the permanent extension of the Children's Health Insurance Program, a 5-year extension of the Community Health Centers Program, and extensions of other expired Medicaid, Medicare, and health extenders be considered and agreed to. The bill, as amended, be considered, read a third time, and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Reserving the right to object. I agree with the gentleman from New Jersey. We wanted to fund the CHIP program, which is exactly why we voted to try and extend it for 6 years just a couple of days ago. The gentleman voted against it. I agree with him that the states are beginning to run out of money and that we need to come up with a reauthorization soon. But this looks more like a way to atone for a bad vote that was just made a couple of days ago on the part of people on the floor today. What we need to do is go back, fund the government. I also care about the veterans that would have been covered by the continuing resolution the gentleman from New Jersey voted against. I care about the military and military families who are affected by the CR. So I think instead of doing these sorts of measures that give some level of cover or comfort for those who voted against these same things just a couple of days ago, why don't we get back on funding the government, opening it back up, and making the right decision and resolving our differences, but at the end of the day, not through these half measures. For that reason, I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Yeah, I've heard my colleagues talk about CHIP and take credit for CHIP, and it's so great what they did. And, you know, of course I'm glad that they now are actually for it. But I've worked on CHIP for a long time, for more than a decade. I'm on the Finance Committee. I think the only one in this room right now that's on the committee that worked on this. We have been asking, this CHIP expired September 30th. Early September, we asked Chairman Hatch to move on CHIP. October, November, December, in the middle of the tax bill, we asked Chairman hatch to move on CHIP. Finally, he did. It was a bipartisan vote. I'll give both parties credit. The other senator from Ohio, Senator Portman, voted for it. Only Senator Toomey opposed it in the whole committee. But then it sat there. It hasn't had a floor vote. So it expired, as I said, September 30th. So we went October, didn't do anything. November, didn't do anything. December, didn't do anything. Now, January 21st, more than a year after President Trump was inaugurated, now they seem to want to do something on CHIP. And I appreciate that they do, don't get me wrong. I care so much about this. 209,000 Ohioans.
For a question.
Of course.
Will the senator yield for a question?
Of course.
The Republicans control the White House in Donald Trump. They control the Senate. They have the majority of the House. You've had much more experience than I have. 112 days this program, serving our children, has lapsed. 112 days, months since September, since the program's lapsed. States have had to take action. There's been crises, there's been problems. I simply ask you this. Your experience, if the Democrats were in control of this body, would that bill have come to the floor probably before 112 days? Would it have come to the floor?
It would have come to the floor. Thank you. I thank the senator from New Jersey, who's been a real leader on this issue, too. The bill would have come to the floor before the clock started, because it would have come to the floor in September, likely, before it even expired. But think about, we talk a lot about issues and talk a lot about numbers in this body, but think about this for a moment. You're a parent in the state of Virginia. You're a parent in 10 miles from here, and you're making $9 an hour, and your wife's making $11 an hour, and you qualify for CHIP because you don't have insurance. Neither you nor your spouse has insurance. You qualify for CHIP. 209,000 in my state, 100 and some thousand in Virginia. You know what happened to you in the last month? You got a letter from the state of Virginia. You got a letter saying, probably around Christmas time, I'm not sure when the letters were sent. You got a letter saying, sorry, your health insurance is about to expire for your children. Imagine what that do. You go out to the mailbox, you pick up the mail, you tear the envelope open, and you tear an envelope open, and you see this, you open this letter and you see that you're going to lose your health insurance. Why? Because the people in this body who get government insurance paid by taxpayers, the 100 privileged senators, the 435 privileged House members, we have insurance, but we don't care enough to do this. Again, we had September, October, November, December, January. Now it's in this bill as a political thing instead of really genuinely caring about CHIP. So say a lot of things on the other side of the aisle, but don't try to tell us that they genuinely care about the 209,000 CHIP beneficiaries in my state, in the 100-some thousand, another couple 100,000 in Connecticut, New Jersey, and Hawaii, because it just ain't so.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. President. So here's the state of play, right? There's a group of 19 to 22 United States senators, a bipartisan group that's trying to find a pathway forward. Senators Schumer and McConnell had a meeting. We don't know exactly how that went. There's some reasons to be encouraged. I think there are not that many reasons to be overly optimistic, but there is a pathway out of this. We can get out of this mess, and I think lots of us understand. A lot of us having served in the legislature or at the executive level, actually at the county level as well, we all understand how insane this is to do 4 CRs in a row. And we all understand that we worked very hard to get to the United States Senate. I'm looking at all of you and thinking about how difficult everybody's race was just to arrive at the world's greatest deliberative body, and forgetting for the moment someone's calculus about who's got a temporary or even long-term partisan advantage in light of this shutdown. We all know shutdowns make this institution weaker. And we all know that shutdowns make senators weaker. And we don't fight tooth and nail and go through that awful process of, there are some joyful moments in a campaign, but nobody necessarily looks forward to it. It's a tough thing. You don't go through that so that you can diminish the body in which you serve, and we are diminished by this process. General Mattis may have put it best when he said that no enemy has done more harm to the readiness of the military than the combined impact of spending caps and 9 of the last 10 years operating under CR. So nobody wants to do this anymore. So we can't do CRs forever, but right now we need one to keep everyone at the table without hurting the American people. And that's the purpose of the Brown UC and the Murphy UC, is to say, whatever our disagreements are, we have an opportunity by unanimous consent to make sure that we don't punish the American people for our inability to agree with each other. Why not keep the government open for 24 or 48 or 72 hours? And from my standpoint, looking at my constituents in the state of Hawaii, we have extraordinary National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration workers. We have an incredible presence of the Department of Defense, civilian DoD employees as well as service members. We have National Park Service people who do extraordinary work. We have lots of government employees, and it's not their fault. It is not their fault. And so I have a very simple unanimous consent request. And it's a little different than the others. The others were to try to avoid this cataclysm. But should we be unable to avoid this cataclysm, I think we should keep our government workers whole, because they didn't do this to us, we're doing this to them. And so my UC request does a very simple thing. It just makes sure that whatever idiocy happens over the next 6 hours or 6 days or 6 weeks, that they are held harmless. And so I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 290S2274 to provide for compensation of federal employees affected by lapses in appropriations, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. First and foremost, I want to thank the federal employees. I want to thank anybody who works for the federal government for all the hard work that they do. I also want to apologize to them on behalf of the actions of some people in this body who voted not to fund the government just a couple of days ago. I hope that we get to a point to where we can fund the government and move on and resolve our differences on very important issues, the DACA issue being one that's very personally important to me. As a practical matter, I think that we will take care of the federal employees because they work hard and they deserve that. What I will tell you is the effect of these CRs, and something that I will say is one of the reasons why I hate these continuing resolutions. Here's what happens every time a CR is threatened to occur or a shutdown is threatened to occur. One of the reasons why these short-term CRs make no sense to me, because tomorrow, if you did a one-day CR, then the good news is everybody would come to work tomorrow, and then tomorrow afternoon you say you're probably not going to come back on Tuesday, or the three-day CR, where you say the good news is you're going to be here on Wednesday, but the bad news is we're going to have to furlough you again on Thursday. At the end of the day, we need to fund the government. We need to fund our military. We need to fund our veterans. We need to extend the CHIP program for 6 years based on the proposal that was voted down by my colleagues and my colleague who's offering this particular motion. That's not the way to do it. I want our leaders to get together. I want our members to get together and solve this problem. These are half measures that do not address the root problem. The root problem is getting people together, get them in a room, and fund the government. For that reason, I object.
Mr. President.
Your objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
I just want to briefly respond to the senator from North Carolina. I actually agree that it would be a half measure to open the government for 24 hours. It would be a half measure to pass just CHIP. It would be a half measure to open the government for 72 hours. But the alternative is that we're doing nothing. Sure, it's a little goofy to keep the government open for 24 hours as we negotiate. It's absolutely goofy. It's embarrassing. It's less embarrassing than actually shutting the government down while we negotiate. Opening the government for 72 hours, a little strange. Not our highest watermark in terms of our legislative prowess. Pretty embarrassing. What's more embarrassing? Shutting the government down. Passing CHIP after it's expired by consent? Awful. Not the world's greatest deliberative body's greatest moment. What's worse? Objecting to doing that. And we want to make sure that our federal employees are made whole. And I agree with the senator from North Carolina. This is a half measure. But you know what? If I'm a federal employee I'll take a half measure, because right now we're giving them nothing. I yield the floor.
Senator from North
I
Carolina.
just want to reiterate to the federal employees that I fully believe that just like these dramas in the past, that we will fund the government, they will be paid. And I apologize on behalf of those who voted against the CR just a few days ago that they're being taken through this process. I, for one, have been here for 3 years. I've never voted against a debt ceiling increase because I believe that we need to pay the bills that we've obligated ourselves to. I've not ever voted for a government shutdown because I believe that we should do the work that we're paid here to do. I will say, in closing, that I also agree that Senator Heller's got a great idea. When we get into this mode and we can't actually fund the government, then why on earth should we be paid for what we're doing? I don't think any U.S. senator should be paid a dime. I don't think any U.S. senator should get health care. Every single day we fail to do our job. And that's something, hopefully we can get unanimous consent tonight to put forth to say until we solve this problem, then maybe we shouldn't get a pay. Maybe we shouldn't get a dime, and maybe we shouldn't get health care. Maybe we should actually put our money where our mouth is. Then maybe we can get some things done. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the gentleman from North Carolina offering apologies on behalf of other members of this body, so let me return the favor. Let me offer an apology on behalf of the Republican majority for the governance disaster that has occurred in the United States Congress over the last year. Why are we here today? We are here today because last year, Republicans spent all of their time and energy trying to steal health insurance from 30 million Americans, trying to rescind protections for people with pre-existing conditions. They spent the first half of the year trying to take insurance away from 30 million people. They were not successful because the American people rose up and told this Congress that was a terrible idea. They spent the second half of the year trying to push through successfully this time a massive tax cut for the wealthy, 80% of that tax cut going to the richest 1% of Americans. Equally as unpopular as the health care repeal, that one was successful. Meanwhile, during 2017, 3 disasters hit the United States in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico. And the Republican Congress forgot to pass the assistance package that is normally automatic after a disaster hits. Meanwhile, Republicans let the Children's Health Insurance Program expire, and millions of frightened parents got notifications that their toddler's health care would cease to exist. Meanwhile, health centers in this country, which provide some of the most important care to the indigent, had their funding expire and all of a sudden had to make budget plans for 2018 with half as much money as they thought they were going to get. Meanwhile, Republicans didn't pass a budget, forgot to pass a single appropriations bill, and CR after CR after CR were required. I'm sorry, on behalf of my Republican friends, that they didn't do their job in 2017. I'm sorry that the American people gave control of the House and the Senate and the presidency to the Republican Party, and they didn't pass a budget. They didn't pass disaster assistance. They didn't reauthorize the Children's Health Care Insurance Program. They didn't provide assistance to health centers. We're trying to be the adults here and say that it's time to do our job. It's time to get assistance to these disaster areas. It's time to pass children's health care reauthorization for the long term. Get those health centers the money that they need to keep their doors open. The Department of Defense needs a budget, not just for 4 months, but for a full year. We're not asking for much. We're just asking for Congress to do its job. And at some point, somebody here has to be the grown-up. Somebody has to be the adult. And so we're saying, let's keep the government open for a day, 3 days, as long as it takes for us to do our job. But to pass another month-long continuing resolution with no hope in sight for the Department of Defense that needs their money, the disaster areas, the kids, the health centers. It's just not what we got elected to do. This has been a governance disaster over the last year. This place has not been doing its job. And we ought to start right now. I love the suggestion of staying all night. The Senator from North Carolina is right. You're not going to get an agreement on all of these complicated issues this evening. But boy, we could try. And had we made the decision to at least keep the government open and operating for a day or 3 days, the pain, at least, would not be felt by the Americans who depend on these services because of the governance disaster that has been visited upon this place over the past year. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Hawaii.
I have one last unanimous consent request, and I appreciate the participation of the Senator from North Carolina, and I appreciate our dialogue here. I think this is constructive and productive. This last UC request is very simple. It's the same one with a small modification that Senator McCaskill made on Friday night. And that is very simple. Every time we've done a shutdown, I've been involved in one. It was the Green Eggs and Ham Affordable Care Act shutdown. It was the worst period of time I ever spent in the Senate. Sherrod Brown always says, no whining on the yacht. Don't feel sorry for yourself for serving in the United States Senate. It is a privilege. It is a great job, but shutdowns are miserable. But during that shutdown and during every other shutdown that I'm aware of, we always took care of our service members. And so Senator McCaskill on Friday night made sure that we just put that UC in so that we made sure that everyone who is serving in harm's way or prepared to serve in harm's way, supports our military, gets paid. And frankly, I understand in the heat of the moment on Friday night when there's still there's a lack of clarity whether we're going to get through it without a shutdown. I understand nobody wanted to allow a UC request of any sort to go through. But then Friday comes, and it's not at all clear that we're going to move on this thing. And now we're into Sunday, and I don't know where we are with this, but I'm getting increasingly worried. And so it's really hard for me to understand why we wouldn't unanimously consent to pay our service members. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 36, H.R. 1301, that the amendment at the desk providing for the continuing appropriations for pay and death benefits for members of the armed services be considered agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President?
The Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. I want to go back and talk about the concept of doing our jobs and so loud I could hear myself. The whole concept of, we've done a lot of stuff over the last 12 months. I mean, for people to say that we haven't done anything, then let's go back and talk about the 12 circuit judges, Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, extraordinary regulatory reform, a number of very positive things. I know that your perspective is different based on what side of the aisle you're on, but I'm actually very proud of what we as a Congress have accomplished and what this president has accomplished. Reserving the right to object, I do object, but I do, Mr. President, I would like to ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of calendar 31 H.R. 1301, that the amendment at the desk which provides for the full funding for authorized activities in the National Defense Authorization Act be considered agreed to, the bill as amendment be considered read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be considered and made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
The Senator, the objection has been heard to the request from the senator from Hawaii?
Is there objection to the request of the senator from North Carolina?
Is there objection to the request from the senator from North Carolina?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I'm a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee, and the way, as the senator from North Carolina knows, that we do defense appropriations is with great care. We have markups. We find out what each service branch needs in terms of personnel, in terms of bases and installation, in terms of new acquisitions. And that process takes a fair amount of time, and that markup is not done. And so I would love to move on defense appropriations, but from the standpoint of responsibly spending hundreds of billions of dollars, we're not there yet, and so therefore I object.
The objection is heard.